Hello, and welcome to Documenting Workflows, a presentation brought to you by California Telehealth Resource Center, part of the OCHIN family of companies. California Telehealth Resource Center, otherwise known as CTRC, is one of the regional resource centers as part of the National Consortium of Telehealth Resource Centers. I am Faye MacDonnell, a senior workflow engineer with OCHIN. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about documenting workflows. And as you all know, virtual care is more common now than ever before due to the pandemic. This has created a larger need for telehealth services within our clinics. That means our telehealth workflows need to be well defined and easy for staff to adopt and implement. I am a big proponent of mapping your current telehealth workflows and adapting them as you learn and grow your telehealth services. During this presentation, I want you to think about how you could start documenting your own telehealth workflows. By mapping out your workflows, you can use them as a learning tool to educate your staff on how to conduct telehealth visits efficiently and confidently. Today, I will cover three main points: what is a workflow, how to map a workflow, and we'll review telehealth workflow examples mapped with the California Telehealth Resource Center. So this here is a workflow I ask myself every day. So workflows can be small, big, simple, complicated. They can be about whatever you need. But really, a workflow is a progression of steps or tasks that make up a work process. So these steps or tasks could be physical or mental. And what we mean by that, physical is anything like logging into a computer, starting a video, or a mental task could be actually a decision that you're making. You're actually going through a thought process. So you could be asking yourself, okay, if the patient doesn't show up or I can't get them to connect to their video, what is my next step? So that's a mental task that you're not actually taking any physical steps to perform. Now, these steps could be performed by various people. It might be a front desk coordinator, a telehealth coordinator, a nurse, a provider. Various roles can be involved in one workflow. And these workflows happen over time and across roles and teams, or sometimes even locations, as we know with telehealth. So when we say workflow map, that just shows a picture of who does what in which order. So a workflow map is a visual representation of the workflow or the work process. Here is an example of an incoming call workflow. Now, this workflow can be a little bit hard to read. There are lots of words within tiny boxes. Seems to kind of go all over the place. There isn't a really clear path where my eye can easily follow the steps I need to take. So this one, while the information is there and can be readily accessed, it's not as easy to follow. So this is a bit more complicated. Where this here is a workflow map that's a little bit simpler. If anyone has cats, you may understand this decision-making tree. Where we like to fall is somewhere in the middle, though. So this one here has a few more steps than the last one, but not quite as many as the first one. The words within the boxes are easy to read. Things aren't crammed in there. And there's not a lot of steps to actually follow. So if we wanted to map one of those workflows, the key things you want to keep in mind are these steps here. First, we want to identify and name the process. If we don't know what we're mapping, we could be mapping anything. We can be mapping everything. We don't want to do that. So we want to name the process. And then second, we want to clarify the purpose. So why is this work process or why is this workflow important? What is it trying to achieve? You want to identify a clear start and end point. And then in between those start and end points, you'll list or draw out the tasks and decision points that make up that process. We want to put those in order. And the last thing is those steps that we put in order also need to be associated with a role. Who is responsible for completing those tasks? At OCHIN, we like to use these basic symbols. There are lots of other symbols out there to map workflows. We have found that less is more. Let's keep it simple, clear, straightforward. So we've chosen to use these symbols here. We can see them laid out in this example. At the very top, we have the example process. That's our name or title. Our purpose statement is right below it to illustrate what an OCHIN workflow map should look like. We have our red ovals to indicate our process start and process end. We have our green boxes to indicate process steps and orange diamonds to indicate decision points. Now our roles are listed on the left-hand side as role 1, role 2, etc. And when you're mapping workflows, you actually want to put in the role, the title of the role, and not a person's name. That person could be out sick one day. There may be multiple people in that role eventually. For whatever reason, that one person may not be the end all be all for those particular set of tasks. So we want to make sure that anyone who's stepping in to fill those shoes within that role, they know exactly what they need to be doing. And one other thing that you'll see in some of the examples at the end is that we like to use verbs. Those are your action words. So what is the exact action that a person in that role would need to take to complete the process step? So how do we facilitate these conversations to actually get things down into a workflow map? Well, first you want to gather your subject matter experts. These are the folks who actually do the work. We find that while we map our workflows, we want to hear from the folks that live it from a day-to-day basis. It really helps when we're trying to create efficiencies and make things just a whole lot easier for folks if we can get the folks who are doing the work to tell us what's going on. Now, in our conversations, these subject matter experts, I like to keep the group between 3 and 8. Not too many, not too few. I like somewhere in the middle. That way you can have a good conversation. You can get multiple points of view, but you're not managing a group of 20 or 30 where you can have side conversations or there could be folks who may not feel comfortable speaking up. So when you get your subject matter experts together, you then want to you can start with a pencil and Post-it if you're in the room together or even a dry erase board. But in our virtual world these days, sometimes I find things like even using Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, you can at least jot down the steps within a process. In Excel, you can just type them out in a list form as easy as 1, 2, 3, identifying the task and the role responsible for each step. In Word, you can use different boxes and diagrams and tables. There's a myriad of ways within Word to document a process. I like to use a program called Microsoft Visio. However, that is not necessary. I have definitely mapped workflows with pencils and Post-it notes before. So what do you do with your pencil or Post-it note or your Word or your Excel or Visio? What do you do with it? Well, in order to get your steps onto wherever you're writing them down on, you need to ask questions. And you want to keep in mind that open-ended questions are going to give you a broader example of the work that's being done. I always like to start with something like, walk me through your typical telehealth visit. Have them give you a bird's eye view of the overall process before you start writing things down. That way you kind of know where you're going to end up before you start. So I then like to ask how does this process start? Where do we start? Do we start with scheduling? Do we start with registration? Do we start even before that with a referral? So we need to identify your start and then ask follow-up questions. Who does this step? How does this person know that that this part of the workflow is now their responsibility? Tell me more about this. When does this happen? How does that happen? Open-ended questions are the key to getting the information you need. Now, the last thing I want to point out here is watch for assumptions. I think sometimes we go into things expecting that we know what's going to happen. I always like to keep an open mind. I always find that when we have this open mind and we go in there and just start asking questions with curiosity, we can find out a whole lot more about the process and how to make it better for everyone. If we assume that things are just stuck in their ways and we can't change things, we'll never hear the great ideas of some of our other folks in the room. So we want to watch for those assumptions, keep an open mind, and just be curious about the process. Without any judgment, just get things down and you can clean it up later. So really, the benefits of mapping workflows is that it defines those tasks in a process in the order in which they occur and and identifies who does what. This really reduces your ambiguity, reduces confusion, so that folks have a clear, concise visual document that they can use to follow a process or even to train others on what the process is. These really workflows really go hand in hand with user guides a lot in training, so that we can, you know, so that we can reach as many people as possible with as many different learning styles as possible. But one of the biggest reasons I like mapping workflows is it helps identify those gaps or problem areas. Even the mere fact of just putting a couple subject matter experts together, asking them questions and documenting their processes, those subject matter experts will begin to see areas that they even want to improve and voice ideas they have for improvement. And you can really get teams together and focus them towards improvement efforts. So long-term success strategies really begin with a champion. So identifying that person that's more or less a cheerleader for a particular workflow. So that might be with telehealth workflows, that might be a telehealth coordinator, that might be a provider that's really championing that. And their responsibility, the responsibility of the champion would be to have them promote that workflow, make sure people understand the workflow, more or less do a little hands-on training if need be, and answer questions. Whereas the owner is a little bit different. So the owner for each workflow would be responsible for updating the workflow on a regular basis. This kind of leads me to my third point of setting a schedule. We like to suggest that at least once a year you're reviewing workflows. With things like the pandemic that just happened, at OCHIN, we updated our workflows about 4 times in 6 months, just because things were changing so rapidly and we were finding out that folks needed different things. So in different times, you might have to update things more regularly, but a regular maintenance calendar was once a year seems to do just fine. And the owner would be responsible for making sure that those get updated. So once they're updated, you have your workflows documented, you want to make sure that those workflows are available in a central location that everyone can access. It could be an internal wiki, internal learning management system, a team binder, whatever you're using, it's fine. Just we want to make sure that everyone knows where they can access those if need be. And then lastly, define your communication strategy for updating staff when workflow changes happen. So if you're going through once a year, you're updating your workflows. Is that a bulk email that's sent out? Is it a poster? Is it a reminder at a team meeting? Just any one of those ways is fine. You just need to define what your strategy is so that folks are aware of any changes. So that's a quick overview of what workflows are, how to map them, and why they're important. With CTRC, we did put together a few workflow diagrams. These are agnostic, meaning that they're not specific to any particular EHR or video software system. This is a framework, a jumping off point that you can use to build your own workflows. A copy of these can be found on the CTRC website. There's a couple here that I like to point out. So this one here is a virtual visit end-to-end agnostic workflow. And this is a workflow for a clinic to schedule a virtual visit and for a provider to complete that virtual visit. So this starts with the support staff receiving a patient appointment request and then scheduling that virtual visit. So from there, the patient will receive an appointment confirmation and complete any pre-check-in or pre-visit check-in items. Now this could be this part here, we see a blue hexagon, and I'm going to pause here. And this is just a little note that there are sometimes, there are some things within a workflow that need an additional note. We don't want to put too many notes onto a page, but sometimes you do need to call something out. So what this call out is saying is that because this is an EHR agnostic workflow, it's not really particular to your software, your system. This pre-visit check-in item, this box here, it may not apply to you. There might also be certain visit types that don't need anything to be completed ahead of time. So a pre-visit check-in item might be something like you need to go into their patient portal and make sure their insurance is up to date. Or it could be something a little bit more involved where a patient actually needs to go complete a lab before the visit actually happens. So these pre-visit check-in items might be big, small, or non-existent depending on your organization. So from there, the support staff reviews upcoming virtual and phone visits, contacts the patient to resolve any outstanding check-in steps, and at the time of the visit, after the patient has received their appointment reminder, they'll begin their visit. The provider will log into a workstation, open their encounter or their visit, and connect with the patient. Now, these steps are very generic. And again, this is a high level overview. So we don't have too many steps in here, but it's a basic framework of a visit to follow. So you might need to, if your providers are struggling with how to connect, you might need to actually spell out a separate workflow for what connect with patient actually means. So you might spell out each click that the provider needs to go through in your system to connect with that patient. Some folks even have the support staff, meaning MA, nurse, or telehealth coordinator, do this connect piece for the provider. And so this connect with patient box might be moved up before the provider logs, before the provider actually meets with the patient, and is moved up to the support staff swim lane. Regardless, once the provider is connected with the patient, they'll confirm a consent has been completed if it's required, enter their chief complaint, review and update patient history, interview and assess the patient, document progress note, document the diagnosis or any other pertinent information, and complete their visit or sign encounter. And then close the connection with the patient. So as I mentioned, sometimes we need something pulled out specifically, like if one box just really needs a lot more detail, we can pull it out into something like this. This is conducting a virtual visit, agnostic, and the purpose statement we have, workflow for a provider to complete a virtual visit, telehealth, telemedicine, video, etc. So this actually lays out those steps, or what does that mean to actually connect? And then lastly, what we noticed at the start of the pandemic is that sometimes with folks trying to get up and going on telemedicine or telehealth as quickly as possible, there were sometimes some connection issues and they had to actually default to a telephone visit instead of a virtual face-to-face visit over the computer. And if that happened, this is an example of that workflow. It may not be necessary to map a workflow for every possible scenario, but this telephone visit was happening enough. We were getting enough requests that we needed to document it. If it's a one-time thing, a workflow may not be necessary, but if you get 10 requests for the same thing, I think a workflow would be necessary at that point. And again, these workflows can be found on the California Telehealth Resource Center website. Thank you for letting me present this information to you. Here's some additional information. Have a great day.